Hey, welcome back to another episode of the She's Making an Impact podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Ngom. Today, we're talking all about visibility, specifically through publicity. I brought in my friend, Amanda Berlin. She's a visibility and business consultant for entrepreneurs. She works with clients on holistic visibility to help them grow their business and impact based on tactics employed during her 12 years in the corporate PR world. She's amazing. You know, she's been featured in Business Insider, Entrepreneur on Fire, Fox 5, Bustle.com, and she's the host of the Empowered Publicity Podcast. We have such a great conversation today showing you how you can become more visible in your business. So let's get to it. Hey, Amanda, welcome to the show.
Hey, Rachel. Thank you for having me. Thrilled to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited for us to chat. So why don't we start off, just tell us a little bit about you and what you do.
Absolutely. My name is Amanda Berlin, and I am a visibility consultant and a business coach for entrepreneurs who feel like they are lost in the noise, like they are shouting into the abyss, and like they're having that fist wagging at the heavens moment when they see other people out there getting attention. They know they're really good at what they do. And the common refrain is, not enough people know about me. And what I have done over the course of 20 years in PR and marketing has been take the tactics that the PR world, which was not built for us small businesses and solo entrepreneurs, take those tactics and translate them for small business, solo women entrepreneurs to be specific, and help them burst out of their word of mouth bubble, find the right people to connect with, and make the impact that they know that they're meant to make by being seen, by being visible, by being heard, by claiming their voices, and by feeling fully expressed in their business and their purpose.
I love it. How did you get into this?
I was in the corporate world for 12 years in marketing and PR. I started in celebrity PR, which was super fun, but I made like $2 for the whole year.
That won't work. No.
It won't work. It was, a lot of the changes that happened in my career, I think really happened because I was put under pressure to, figure it out. And I will say that I probably inertiaed into a lot of choices that I made. And so I found myself in this really cool job in celebrity PR, and I probably would have stayed there if the company that I was working for hadn't gone out of business. But I then was recruited by an old boss to come over to the traditional PR world. And by contrast, what was more challenging in the traditional PR world than in the celebrity PR world is that no one really is as excited about the new drug for fibromyalgia as they are to talk to Paul McCartney. So it became more challenging to create interest in the things that we were talking about. And this is no shade at fibromyalgia. I know that it is a real disease and a real affliction that is very painful. Just this is all to say that some of the materials that I was handed in the corporate world required a lot of massaging and spinning in order to make them palatable for the mainstream media in a way that they were much more interested in celebrities. And so that really became my quest over the kind of latter part of my corporate career, was taking things that, whether it was a consumer product or a financial firm or a pharmaceutical, that were not traditionally going to be talked about a lot in the media, to find a story that was going to be interesting to the general public out there. And that was what my charge was in my waning years in the corporate world as editorial director of a firm. I was in charge of finding the story. And that has really kind of transcended or bridged into my entrepreneurial career, which I've been in for the last 10 years, in terms of the fact that that's what I help my clients do, is find the story and find the language and find the communication that's going to compel their audience to take action and to recognize that my client, is for them, that you are for me, by really creating language that resonates on a very deep level with the problem and the vision that their client is seeking to explore.
Amazing. So let's say we're starting off into the, publicity world. What are some things we can do right away to be seen, heard, and recognized for our genius?
Amazing. So I teach a framework for visibility that really is comprised of three kind of concentric circles that are like embedded on top of each other. So the innermost circle is where I would always say that we would begin. And that innermost circle is the bucket of public relations that I call collaborations and alliances, or your strategic partnerships. And the reason why that's a great place to begin is because even at its most base level, I always ask a client who might be, whether they're just starting out or they're launching something new, have you told everyone you know about it yet? Mm-hmm. Like, that is the baseline of public relations. Like, let's make sure that even your closest allies, your closest circle, know about what you're doing, because you never know who they then know. Mm-hmm. On a more sort of professional level, your strategic partners are your fastest track to generating trust with a new audience. And so that's the fastest way to get in front of new potential clients who are more and most likely to create an investment with you. So what I'm talking about is what I call the trust transfer. And it happens when you collaborate with a partner who has an audience, and that audience trusts your collaborator. They trust sort of that intermediary that's putting you in front of their audience. And what ends up happening sort of in the alchemy of that connection is that the audience begins to trust you, provided you show up and give them something worthwhile. They will trust you more quickly because they trust the person who is introducing you to them. Yep. And so that's really where I would always suggest beginning with your PR journey. And I think even just taking a huge step back, we may not have actually identified that as PR. Like, I think that we have a very specific notion of what public relations is. And I think a lot of times people go directly to that media kind of pillar of public relations. Right. They think of media immediately. PR really is about creating relationships with your public writ large, and your strategic partnerships are a very powerful way to create relationships.
So this might be like the new generation of PR, like, I love that. So how do we find strategic partners?
That's a great question. So the best way to find strategic partners is to, I think it's about recognizing who your audience is listening to, who are the sort of micro influencers in your space. And when it comes to, I think one of the ubiquitous questions is, okay, so like, I know who my audience is listening to, I know who are the influencers in my space, but like, why would they want to talk to me? Like, what am I supposed to say to kind of make that connection? And in any connection you're making in your visibility or PR outreach, it's important to remember that we're all human beings that have a job to do. And that you, as the expert in your unique space, have something potentially valuable to offer to another community that may not have the insight from, the person leading it. They may not have that specific insight that you can impart. So really starting by creating a relationship, by reaching out and saying like, hey, here's what I'm up to. I know you're up to this. I'd love to learn more and see how I can support you and your community. It's a very disarming way of starting the conversation and creating that relationship.
Cool. When you say micro influencers, so what would be considered a micro influencer?
I just use that term because I'm not talking about like a Kim Kardashian or like a mega influencer who has like, a massive following on Instagram. I guess the way that I qualify that term is by kind of thinking of people who are at the helm of a community or a mastermind or a group program or something that aligns with what you're teaching. And so another kind of step back on that question is the way you find these people is by looking at who does something different than you before the same people. And that's the way that you really kind of take a lot of the tension out of requesting kind of partnership, because there's no competition there. And as much as we would like to say, we always favor collaboration over competition, it's very hard to align with someone who does something exactly that's kind of exactly the same or similar to what you do. It's much easier to align when you can support the community in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Okay. And then we find our micro influencers. We want to reach out to them. How should we get in contact with them? How do you start that conversation without being kind of like a creeper?
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to kind of be a fangirl a little bit. I think that always helps, but it's not about being a fan in a disingenuous way. It always has to be super authentic. So you have to really like the person's work. You have to consume the person's work. It really helps sometimes if you've been invested in the person's work. That's another sort of like often overlooked way to be part of someone's community is to join them and be part of their work as a client. But the way that I like to approach the people I approach for collaborations is either I think there's two kind of categories that are kind of coming up for me. Sometimes you will just approach as like, hey, I like I said before, I'm really inspired by the work you're doing. This is what I'm doing over here. I'd love to connect with you and see if there's a way for us to support each other. Mm-hmm. That's one way. Another way, and I think that as your business grows, this category becomes more relevant. Another way to create a collaboration is to invite someone into something, whether it's basically to invite them in to participate in the platform you've created. So whether it's inviting them to do a podcast interview, inviting them to be part of a summit or an event that you're hosting, inviting them to do an Instagram live with you. This is a great way to forge a relationship because you're immediately offering them something, giving them an opportunity without asking for something from them. Yep.
I'll share for our people what I've done in the past is, I've seen people speak on, at Global Leadership Summit in front of tons of people, or I'll listen to them on a podcast. I'll see them speak on stages. If I resonate with them and their message, I'll send them a DM on Instagram and tell them how much I enjoyed their thing that they did and start the conversation or create a connection. And then from there, I'll invite them to speak on our podcast. That's what, I love having a podcast because it's such a great way to make those connections with people that I never would have before. Because for them, they're getting the opportunity to get in front of our audience. So they're able to reach more people. So for them, it's kind of oh, sure. And then for me, I'm able to actually connect with them, which has been awesome.
Yeah, I think that podcasters have a unique opportunity to leverage that part of their platform to create connections. Yep. And I often see people kind of, whether it's a love of the medium or a desire to, for me, I started a podcast originally. You and I are, I think, at the similar phase of podcasting where, we're in our 300s of episodes. Yeah. But originally I started podcasting because it was a way for me to reliably continue to create content on a regular basis. And I wasn't thinking initially about how to leverage that platform to support the business. And I think that
I wasn't either. I wasn't thinking about the connections that I could make through the podcast. That was not on my radar.
Exactly. So yeah, case in point, it's an overlooked opportunity.
For sure. For sure. Okay. So that's the middle part of the circle. Yeah. What are the other two?
That's the innermost circle. The second concentric circle, which is the middle. Well, yeah, you're right. It's the middle of, if it's like a bullseye. Yes.
I'm just like trying to visualize it,
yes.
like I'm a visual person. I know a lot of our audience is too. So I'm like, all right, I see it in the middle, right?
Yes, it's the middle. Yeah.
Okay.
I was thinking of it if it's three parts, like the middle being the second part, but yes. So collaborations and alliances is the centermost part of the three concentric circle model.
Got
so
it.
Collaborations and alliances, right, is like the most intimate type of visibility you can engage in. The second circle is speaking and events. And so this is, like, at risk of stating the obvious, speaking on stages at conferences or at events that other people are putting on. You get chosen as a speaker and you're put on that stage and literally, offered to your audience as an expert, or you host an event, whether it's a workshop, whether it's a telesummit, whether it's a live event, a virtual event. You're creating an experience for your clients, for your community, not just for your clients, for your community, for your prospective clients. And the reason why this is so powerful is because it kind of bridges the collaboration aspect and the intimacy of that with this sort of like expert, the really being seen and being perceived as an expert in your space, because you're literally, elevated above your audience on that stage.
Yep, for sure. Okay. So speaking on stages, hosting events, what else?
Yeah. So let me just say one other thing about hosting events as well, is that it's very powerful so speaking, you're ostensibly chosen by someone else to speak on a stage. With events, they're equally powerful because you are creating this experience, but you're also kind of appointing yourself as expert. And especially if you're doing an event in collaboration, and this is where it sort of permeates into that other realm of visibility of collaborations and alliances. If you're doing an event as a collaboration, it can really enhance your relationship with your collaborators or collaborator. And it really is very powerful to be seen as the leader at the center of this effort, especially when it's, what I'm referring to here are the tactics of like hosting a summit or a panel discussion or a round table or something where you're bringing together other experts in complementary spaces. And so it really creates a great relationship between you and your co-hosts. So that's a great way to sort of enhance your network.
Love it. Okay.
Yes.
Did we get all three?
And the outermost circle is media.
Media.
So so that's the one that, again, we were saying earlier that people often equate almost unilaterally with public relations. But in this model, particularly for solo entrepreneurs, for small businesses, it is a medium that actually doesn't always translate directly into new client acquisition, because the media is so broad and because it is a little bit further removed from you creating that relationship with your audience. It's actually the least likely to bring you new clients. What media does for a business is it validates you. And so when someone sees you in collaboration and they love what you're saying when you're hosting this masterclass as a guest in someone's community, or they see you speak on a stage and they're like, I gotta see what else this person's all about. And they go to your website and they see you've been featured in all of this media. It validates you in their mind and they get to say to themselves, oh, I was right about her. She was featured in all this media. So I'm, my perception or my impression of her is spot on. She's got the stuff.
Right. Okay. So the media won't necessarily bring you the clients, but it'll validate you.
Exactly, exactly. And one kind of note that I want to make about all of this is that in public relations is a piece of marketing, and public relations tactics embody the principle that you are earning these opportunities, which is a very powerful position to be in the eyes of your audience, because you are not paying for this exposure. You, in the eyes of your audience, have been chosen because of your expertise, because of what you can provide to this audience. And so it's kind of a unspoken and subconscious note that we take as your audience when we see you being interviewed that contributes even more deeply to your credibility, because we know that that decision maker chose you to provide your expertise, whether it's in an interview, whether it's on a stage, or whether it's with a strategic partner. Those decision makers chose you. You did not exchange money with them in order to get onto their platform.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Okay. So we've talked about, leveraging other people's audiences, strategic partnerships, media. What are some other visibility hacks that we might not be doing?
So some of my most favorite visibility hacks are really just sort of the most basic of interpersonal connection. And that's really that's the bottom line with growing sort of your presence in your space, is just creating as many authentic relationships as you possibly can. Mm-hmm. And so that means that doesn't mean you have to devote hours and hours a day per month on coffee chats or these very in-depth kind of connections. What I always want to see my clients doing is being very discerning about what they or who they end up bringing into their circle. Mm-hmm. I want you to be discerning because I want you to create relationships with the right people for your business, in terms of the people who are going to have the biggest impact on you and your business. But I want you to be discerning because I also want you authentically aligned with the people that you're reaching out to. And so I had a client yesterday who I was talking to about sort of what she had accomplished over the course of the year. And I know that she had made a goal for herself to have 52 coffee chats over the course of the year, one a week, totally doable. She had accomplished that goal in 3 months, which meant she spent a lot of time on coffee chats. And she realized that where she had been posting to sort of bring in these appointments to have these coffee chats were actually not exactly the right places for her to be attracting new collaborators, because she just kept attracting people who were kind of at the same place as she was in business and who were also trying to have as many chats as possible. And so I always want you to be discerning about who you're connecting with, where you're putting yourself, because public relations is also very much about perception, and it's about who you are seen with, who you are aligned with, and how the public perceives you in relation to sort of the wider community of what is going on out there.
Got it. I love the coffee chat per week idea.
Yeah.
How do you make sure you're spending time with the right people?
That's a really good question. So there's, I think that's a combination of how does it feel to be in community with this person, to you as another human? Does this feel aligned? Does it feel like, is there tension? Do you feel like there's, I want to use the expression pulling teeth, but I don't like it. I don't like that expression, but is it, does it feel like an effort? Is it really effortful to be in community or aligned with this person? Does it feel equitable? Does it feel mutually beneficial? You have to feel into that. And then also you want to look kind of strategically or analytically at the results. Has anything come of it? Have you gotten any good connections through this person? Whether they've turned into clients or not, every relationship could be beneficial. And that's where we go back to the feeling of it. Even if like a relationship could be beneficial and never turn into a client. Maybe they're meant for a different, a different position in your life or in the hierarchy of your relationships. Mm-hmm. So that's where we would turn back to, like, how does it feel to be in community with this person? Because if it feels good, even if nothing, has quote unquote come of it, then it's still probably worthwhile to be in community with them.
Yeah. Something that Russell Brunson says is to dig your well before you're thirsty. Do you agree with that? And how would you suggest we do something like that?
That's really interesting. So the way I'm like pretty dense when it comes to like metaphor. So the way I'm hearing that is like, we want to sort of create the container for the result that we want before it's even.
The way I hear it is you want to add value in your relationships before you ask them for something.
Okay.
Makes sense?
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I resonate with that. It's just, like I said, I hear metaphors differently, I guess. So, yeah, I mean, 100% you want to add value before you ask for something. I am always of the mind that we want to offer support before we would request support. And so that's why, going back to what we were talking about in terms of, having a platform and invite, like creating opportunities to invite collaborators into things, that's, such a powerful way to start to solidify a relationship, is by making an offer first and foremost, and because that also can be a springboard for other communication. So for instance, I'm hosting a summit in the next couple of weeks, as are you. And offering a position in the summit to someone, whether it works out or not, is an opportunity to start the conversation with them. So like, if let's say for some reason, the scheduling doesn't work, I at least, it's an entree to have a conversation. And then maybe there's another thing that comes up down the line that creates an opportunity for us to collaborate. Or if someone is like, oh, I really, hate doing podcast interviews after I've never gotten this response, but like, if you offer someone the opportunity to come on the podcast, they're like, I don't do podcast interviews. Okay, well, let's talk about, how else we might be able to collaborate. So it really, making the offer and providing support before asking for support gives you the opportunity to either immediately come to something where you can collaborate, or B, have a conversation to brainstorm where you might be able to collaborate.
Cool. What does it mean to you to make an impact?
I love this question. So to me, making an impact means leaving the space more open, more inclusive, more generous than it was when I arrived here. And I really hope that my impact is that I encourage more women business owners to claim their voice, to raise their voice, to communicate their story, their passion, their work out there in the world, so that the field really begins to open up for all of us collectively. Because what I could see happening by virtue or by extension of those of us who have privilege and platform, by us stepping forward and using our voices, we are able to pass the microphone to people who haven't classically had that opportunity. And that's what needs to happen in the world that we live in right now. And so that's really my purpose, is or the impact that I hope to have, and that I hope precipitates the work that I do, is that people out there see that it's possible to raise your voice, claim your voice, speak your purpose. And it provides an example, but then also we kind of can take up more space and invite others into the space as well.
Cool. I love it. What's one of the best books you've read?
One of the best. So I read fiction mostly for pleasure. It's like my last thing I do before I go to sleep. So I can speak to a fiction book, and then I'll also speak to a nonfiction book. So one of my daughter asked me this question, and I realized I kind of with everything that I like, did I answer that right? Questioning my interactions with her all the time. But so one of my favorite books is State of Wonder by Ann Patchett, which is about a female researcher who goes into the Amazon because there is tale of a drug or like a plant medicine or something that this tribe is using to combat malaria. And it turns out that it also is a fertility drug that allows them to have babies until they are, in their 80s or something like that. And it's, I just loved it because it was sort of, it was an adventure, and it was sort of an ethical, like a moral tale. And I just love her writing. I just resonate with Ann Patchett as a person. There's an interview that she did. I went back to it a couple of years ago that I listened to for the first time in 2014. And it was like one of those things where you are like, I remember exactly where I was when I was listening to that interview. It just like totally resonated with me, particularly her personal views on like marriage and relationships and things like that. So I'm just a huge fan of hers as a human. And the other book that I will recommend is Radical Acceptance by Tara Brach, which is a book about, it's a combination of her scholarship in Western psychology and in Eastern religion and Buddhism. And it's just such a lovely sort of dovetailing of these two different expertise and insights. And there's a lot of humor and practical application, but there are principles from that book that I must have read that 15 years ago that I go back to just based on memory over and over and over again, just in terms of what we do to ourselves around sort of the discomfort that we feel in life. And the concept that she teaches that really stuck with me is the second arrow in Buddhism, which is the pain that is sort of optional, because there is pain that we're going to experience. Like that's part of being human. The judgment that we place on that pain, like I shouldn't feel this way, or I wish I wasn't experiencing this, or whatever it is, that any of our comments on that pain, that is the optional pain. That's the second arrow. And I find that to be so powerful.
Amazing. Where can we connect with you?
You can find me on my podcast, Empowered Publicity. You can find me at amandaberlin.com. And if you want a sort of visual representation of the pillars of visibility, you can go to amandaberlin.com/visibility. And there is a quick training rundown of what we talked about here that'll help you sort of figure out where you want to begin with visibility so you can feel more fully expressed out there in your work and in the world.
Amazing. Amanda, thank you so much for being on the show today and adding so much value to our audience. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Rachel, for holding space for these conversations.